Good evening, Professor. This is my final activity, the summary of everything we have looked at in the translation module. So it was difficult for me to decide what to talk about. There have been a lot of very interesting things in this module, but I hope I have taken out the most important points. So to start with, I would like to talk about the history of translation, which was the first activity we did. So the first historical references we have to about translation are from Greek to Latin. The Romans started to find translation very important as their empire expanded and they met up with other peoples who obviously had different languages and different cultures, and the Romans wanted to communicate with them. And then the ancient Greeks, when their empire ended, many of their works, their scientific works, mathematical works, were translated into Arabic, mostly. The Arabs then took on all of that knowledge. A bit later on, we have Saint Jerome, who is known by some as the father of modern translation, and he is known for translating the Bible into Latin because it was originally written in Greek and in Hebrew, and he decided it was important for it to be in Latin, which was a language that more people understood, and the church of that time used Latin as its language. In the 16th century, part of education was translation between Greek and Latin texts. Those were seen as the languages of scholars, and it was considered very important to have knowledge of both those languages, and translation was a very important part of that. Later, in World War II, translation became very important at the Nuremberg war trials, where the German officials, were put on trial for war crimes, and the representative judges from the United States, France, and England needed to be able to communicate with the Germans. Some famous translators are Gaspar Antonio Chi, who translated for the Spanish in the Yucatan, Sacagawea, who translated for Lewis and Clark on their expedition in the States, and Alexander Burns, who was a British spy in India. So, a little bit of background to translation. Ezra Pound is very well known for translating Chinese poetry, and he advocated the necessity to translate rhythm. Then came Quine, who said there was no such thing as equivalence, that every word automatically means a different thing in a different language. Eugene Nida, the proper translation meant translating the meaning, not necessarily word for word. The important thing was to convey the meaning of the original text however you could, changing words if necessary. So, what about translating or translation? Are they the same? Well, there are lots of different approaches to this. For example, the linguistic, which focuses on the structural differences, or social-cultural, where the text is supposed to look like a translation rather than an original text in the target language. And now people look more to the interdisciplinary approach, which brings lots of different things together, including socio-cultural knowledge, as well as looking at the linguistic elements of a text. Translation theory is to do with what to preserve in the text, how foreign values come out, for example, journalism or literature, and it's very important to um, to include these cultural aspects as well. And it can often be very difficult to translate these literary or specialist texts and to know exactly what language to use, what words to use, because the words are very cultural and context specific. A big problem can come with translators and how competent they are. Being bilingual doesn't make you a good translator. You need translating skills as well. And you need to be competent in not only the target language, but your native language. And this often causes a lot of problems. Translating students just simply don't have a very high level of their native language, which might seem surprising, but they make a lot of punctuation mistakes, they don't have a wide vocabulary, or they are lacking a lot of cultural knowledge to know what words will be appropriate in a specific context. So teaching translation can be quite difficult. There are masters in translation, and an important part of that is to try and teach this cultural knowledge as well as just the linguistic knowledge. There's a expression that a good translator should be culturally bilingual, not just linguistically bilingual. So finally then, we look at translation as a way to teach and to help in our classes. So you can improve awareness of differences between the native language and the target language. You can focus on accuracy, and accuracy meaning, do students really know what a specific word means? As we talked about earlier, there is not necessarily an exact equivalent word, but do they know what this concept refers to? And though it might seem to have an equivalent in the target language, maybe it's not quite the same. Recent approaches, for example, the direct method, have insisted that there should be no translation in the classroom at all, that there should be only the target language. However, people such as Soares, who produced the Headway series, have said that translation can be very useful to check learning and to explore these differences between the target language and the native language. So it's very important that our students go through steps of translation and develop other skills, for example, using dictionaries, which can be a very big problem. Translators don't find the correct words. Look for textual features and interpret exactly what the text is trying to say. So we can use other activities such as summaries. So then translating is really as much about the process as about the product. And it's very important for us as teachers to help our students as they go through this process. Thank you, teacher. Good evening.